It would be an understatement to say that 2024 has been an incredibly eventful year for the pop girls. We've seen so many new albums this year, all of which have been truly incredible for each artist in their own ways. We've seen lots of artists who've been working so hard for so long finally have their big breaks and go mainstream. We've seen presidential candidates adopt pop girl music into their campaigns. We've seen chart cheating accusations along with just plain cheating accusations. And now that I've hit 1,000 subscribers and acquired YouTube fame, I thought what would be a better way to celebrate this milestone than by ranking all these albums in one video, incurring fans of all these artists to start heated debates in my comments and get me cancelled. Yay! To preface this video, I want to clarify one very important thing. This is not me ranking every single album that's been released this year. I'm not a professional music critic, I don't listen to everything that's released throughout the whole year. What I wanted to do is talk about all my favorite albums from the year and rank them one by one. And it just so happens that my favorite albums this year have been what the big pop girls have been putting out, because that's just the kind of music I like if you can't tell by now. But more importantly, the pop girls have been absolutely killing it this year. I can distinctly remember when all of these albums came out and the time period from the moment I first heard them of me having them on loop for like literally days or even weeks on end until the next big thing came out. We have seriously been blessed with so much incredible music this year, and it kind of baffles me how some of y'all take more enjoyment in pointless fan wars than just listening to and enjoying the music. And yes, I know, I'm literally making a video ranking all these albums and I guess I'm pitting them against each other, so maybe I shouldn't be talking, but I recognize the immense amount of work and talent that went into making all of these, as with so many other albums released this year that I'm not going to be covering. I'm just here to put my little critical thinking cap on and tell you which albums I thought were better or worse. But it's not an objective analysis, it's just my opinion. Really, a more fitting title for this video would have been like my top 10 albums of 2024, but there's only 9 albums in this video and I wanted to put a bunch of pop girls in the thumbnail, but anyone I put in the thumbnail I will be talking about in this video, so it's not really clickbait. Like I said, there's only 9 albums in this video. I do think it consists of the most popular stuff to my knowledge, but I'm by no means trying to discount the work of other artists that I just don't really keep up with. Genuinely, if an album isn't here, it's probably just because I haven't listened to it yet, and I fully acknowledge this is not a comprehensive ranking of all the pop music from this year, alright? We cool. As we go through the list, I'll give you my overall thoughts and opinions as usual, a numerical ranking out of 10, and my top 3 songs on each album, just for funsies. Not the entire album ranking though, I'm not trying to get cancelled 9 times in a row. Okay, there's really nothing else to disclaim, so time to put my fears aside and get right into it. Okay, hi, actually I do have one more quick thing before we get into the video. I have a Google form open right now where I want you guys to submit any and all unpopular opinions, as people call it, about music, about pop music, pop culture, the music industry, anything at all that you want to see me react to in a video, and in a couple weeks I will make a video reacting to as many as I can. I thought this would be a fun way to celebrate 1,000 subscribers, and I do have quite a few submissions so far, which is awesome to see, but I will say a large majority of these are about Taylor Swift, and that's great. I love talking about Taylor, but as you guys know, I've already done that quite a bit, and I wanted this video to be kind of like a more general thing on music and pop culture in general, and have it kind of cover a wide variety of things. So please continue to send me any and all opinions you want me to react to, but if you're gonna make it about Taylor, just make it good. That's all I'll really say. Link will be in the description, go wild with it. I'm really excited to see what you guys submit, and let's get back to the video. Catch me or I go Houdini. Now let's all take a deep breath and remember what I said. This is not the worst album of the year. This is still a really strong album. It just happens to be my least favorite on the list at hand, okay? With that out of the way, Radical Optimism is great. To me, the issue I had with this album is that the singles kind of just outdid everything else for me. She kicked off this era with Houdini, which really captured the magic of Dua Lipa's pop sound while also offering something new. It was more sinister, more synthy, and also saw Dua really lean into choreo, which was a huge focus this era, and something I actually really loved. I mean, this dance was going viral, and this really seemed to be the start of a new future nostalgia. Training Season was also great to me, not quite as good as Houdini, but still fun, typical to Dua's pop sound. Then we got Illusion, which is possibly my favorite song of the whole year, or at least in my top 5. The psychedelic synthy nature of this song is just so addictive. The dance and accompanying music video are so stunning and incredible. it's just pop perfection. But the rest of the album didn't quite hold up to me in the same way. There are definitely a few other standouts. I think End of an Era is a great opener, These Walls is really heartfelt, Falling Forever is another psychedelic banger like Illusion, and Maria is a really clever usage of Stereo Love. And I did listen to this album quite a bit, but I also don't remember as much of it from a lot of the other B-sides, which never really stood out to me that much. And again, it kind of feels like she overdealt her hand with Houdini and Illusion in particular. With all that said, still a great album. Those songs I mentioned I do really enjoy, and the others aren't bad by any means. I also do really like the synthy, more like oceanic vibe of this album compared to Future Nostalgia. Like, there is a very clear sonic evolution going on here. Dua Lipa still knows how to make really good pop music. That is an undeniable fact. As I give you my top 3, I'll be going from third to first. So my top 3 here are Maria, Houdini, and Illusion. 7 out of 10. Even at the bottom of the list, this is still an album I re-listen to every now and then, and that I like to come back to. Alright, let's hope I didn't get cancelled right there. Moving right along. I thought I would include this because why not? I mean, it's not technically an album, it's an EP, but it's close enough. Plus, this did top the Billboard 200, so it is definitely important and relevant pop girl music. I haven't really ever talked about this much on my channel, but I was huge into K-pop mainly during like 2020, 2021, because I needed something to occupy myself during the pandemic. And Twice has always been my favorite group. In fact, Twice was my most listened to artist on Spotify for like 3 years in a row. Like, genuinely. Say what you want about K-pop, but Twice has been putting out banger after banger for years on end. Not many else can say the same. Anyways, I'm not like in the K-pop rabbit hole as much anymore like I once was, but I still keep up mainly with Twice, just because again, they are like one of my all-time favorite artists. And I think this album was a ton of fun. I don't have too much to say about it. This is like their 13th EP, so they've been doing this for a while, and it felt pretty standard to Twice. They make fun pop music. I really like their music. It's a solid EP. My top 3 are I Got You, which was the pre-release, One Spark, which was the title track, and then New, because this song honestly had me in a chokehold for a long time after this album came out. 7 out of 10 again, moving right along. And you're not here, God, I'm actually invested, haven't even met him. I was genuinely surprised by how much I liked The Secret of Us. I don't keep up with Gracie Abrams much. This is actually the first time I properly sat down and listened to an album of hers, mainly because one of my close friends told me I should listen, and yes, I was kind of lured in by the Taylor feature. And I don't know if Gracie is really considered one of the pop girls, but I know this album ended up charting really well. She is starting to get a lot more recognition now, which is great. And I really like this album. I will admit it's a little inconsistent throughout its runtime, similar to Radical Optimism. There's a few songs in particular in the second half that kind of dragged to me, but honestly, there are a number of songs on this album that are just so solid, and it just works for me. Felt Good About You is a fun opening number. Risk and Close to You are just perfect choices for singles. They're so catchy, such addicting pop music, and it's a really unique sound, I feel like, from Gracie. It had me hooked for quite a bit over the summer. I Love You, I'm Sorry, Us, I Knew It, I Know You, Free Now. These are just standard ballads, and I just really like this kind of music. I don't know too much about the online discourse around this album because, again, I'm not really a Gracie Abrams fan. All I really saw was like that one guy, Will, who called this an awful album without any explanation. I actually really like this creator. He's thoughtful, he formulates his own opinions, not just what people want him to say, but like, come on, really? I'm kind of tired of seeing everyone call artists like Gracie Abrams just younger copies of Taylor Swift. Like, yes, Taylor Swift was instrumental in bringing this kind of personal guitar-based acoustic songwriting into mainstream media, but like, if artists are growing, it's not because they're copying Taylor Swift. Like, they still have their own unique niches. And for me, I do think a lot of that is Gracie's vocal texture, and especially in this album. She was the opener for my show when I went to the Eras Tour, and even though I knew nothing about her then, her performance was so entrancing. Her vocals are really strong and unique. And I also just don't really understand how you can call this like a bad album. Like, even if it's just not your kind of music, this is just good pop music. I don't really know what else to say. My top 3 on the album are Us, I Knew It, I Know You, and Risk, which, I mean, it blew up for a reason. It's really damn catchy. I think if all the songs were of the same high caliber, it would have really become a top favorite for me, but I'm still giving it a 7 out of 10. Give Gracie Abrams her credit. She deserves it. She's a good artist. I was hitting my marks, 'cause I can do it with a broken heart. So this is what, my 4th time, I think, talking about this album on this channel now. I've given you my song-by-song lyrical analysis, I've given my scattered opinions on all the songs, and I've even talked about the era as a whole. But I feel like I haven't really given you just like my plain thoughts on this album and my enjoyment of it. And to that point, yeah, It's pretty good. The way I see it, as I talked about in my analysis video, there's kind of two sides to this project. There's the immature, childish, unfiltered side of it, seen on songs like But Daddy I Love Him, Florida, So High School and I Hate It Here. It's satirical, it's intentionally anti-romantic. And then there's the more honest, vulnerable, soulful side that Taylor is more known for from albums like Folklore and Evermore. And we have songs on that note like So Long London, LOML, The Black Dog, and The Prophecy. And all the songs that I just mentioned are easily some of my favorite songs of the entire year. Again, there are quite a number of songs on this album that I think truly capture the magic of Taylor Swift's music, why I love Taylor Swift and have been following her for so long, and have become some of my most played songs this year. But I think the biggest critique of this album that I do agree with is the lack of concision and cohesion. Now, this is the longest project to come out by any artist this year, and that doesn't inherently make it bad. In this case, size does not matter. Longer or shorter doesn't really matter if you utilize the runtime you choose to its fullest potential. And that's really where TTPD suffers, because amidst all the beauty here, there are quite a few tracks that I really don't care for very much. Fortnite is a beautiful start to the project, but the title track and My Boy, etc. kind of drag a tiny bit and have that artificial synthy sound from the 1989 Vault tracks that I think doesn't work here quite as well. I think the stretch from Down Bad till Guilty as Sin is genuinely really consistent and good because it feels new, it feels fresh, and it has this mix of country and synth that I really love. But after that, the album continues to jump back and forth between really, really good stuff and kind of boring stuff. Then we have the anthology, which is overall pretty consistent, but it also does kind of feel like 3 albums spliced together, which can make it a lot to handle when you take the entire project as one. So with this mix of both really good and choicey stuff present in this project, I really struggle to place this album in this list more than any other, honestly. It's definitely one of my most listened to albums of the year. There's so many songs I adore, but an album is more than the sum of its parts. Even if this album has just like quantitatively more songs that I like than other albums on this list, I feel like the remaining albums do a better job of pushing forward one cohesive narrative and sound, making those a little better to me. I think if she spent more time picking and choosing the sounds and lyrics here, this would easily be one of the best albums of the year and one of her best albums. But as a lot of you have pointed out, it may have even been an intentional play on Taylor's part to have a messier album that really was cathartic and personal in nature, and ultimately this is still going down as a very strong album for me. My top 3 have not changed since my full discography ranking. They are still LOML, But Daddy I Love Him, and The Black Dog. 7.5 out of 10, great album, let's move on. When I first listened to this album, I just remember my jaw being on the floor the entire time. Billie Eilish has consistently been one of my favorite artists. She has this style and energy that I really love, but there were so many new, unexpected things in this album that I think were really great to me and are taking Billie's artistry to a new level. Skinny hits you right off the bat with some pretty devastating lyrics, especially the titular lyric harkening back to Happier Than Ever, setting up this idea of happiness and self-fulfillment that runs throughout Billie's entire music, but it just hits you like a train on this album in particular. Lunch is such a fun, raunchy banger, something I was not expecting at all from Billie, but I'm here for. Chihiro and Birds of a Feather honestly have some of her best vocals ever. The bridge in The Greatest, the hyperpop switch in L'amour de ma vie, the way Blue, Skinny, and The Greatest are all connected. Genuinely, there are just so many incredible decisions made throughout this album that make it such a great listening experience in my opinion. I will also say this is a no-skip album. I think Bittersweet is the only song that kind of drags to me and could have been reworked maybe a little bit, but even then I still enjoy it. My main complaint about this album is that it's kind of short. And hear me out, because I know there are other albums ranked higher that are shorter. I did say size doesn't matter. But when I'm done listening to this album in particular, I feel like I want more. And not just in the sense of like, wow, that was so good, it's over already, but more in the sense of I feel like something is missing. I feel like especially in the middle of the album, going from Wildflower to The Greatest to L'amour, the story just feels like it's moving a little too quickly, especially because then there's only 3 tracks after that which are a little slower. So I do think there are some little problems with the pacing, and I think maybe even just 1 or 2 more songs at the same level as these in the middle of the story maybe would have helped out and taken this to very high on my list. But it's still a really amazing album. My top 3 are Birds of a Feather, Skinny, and L'amour de ma vie. I mean, that hyperpop switch is just absolutely phenomenal. I almost dislocated my jaw just listening to that part for the first time. 8 out of 10. I love the sound, I love the style, and I can't wait to see where Billie goes from here. I had this video idea planned for a while, but I was holding out because I really wanted to include this album in particular. Knowing Sabrina's most recent album, Emails I Can't Send, is super heartfelt and ballady in nature, tackling more heartfelt, vulnerable themes for her like I talked about in another video, but also seeing her transition into a more humorous, unfiltered style of singing and writing that became super popular with Espresso and Please Please Please, I was really curious to see where she would go with Short and Sweet and how she was going to mix these two sides on this album. And honestly, it turned out even better than I imagined. Short and Sweet is a blast throughout its entire runtime, not a single skip to be found. And even though the runtime is really short, this album does feel like it tells the entire story it wants to and maximizes its potential all the way through. I think having 12 tracks helps here, especially even though the tracks are overall shorter than like Billy's album, the story is full. And it hasn't been too long yet with this album, but the more I listen, the more I just fall in love with it. Largely, this album showcases the humorous, raunchy, unfiltered, and even kind of egotistical side of this persona that Sabrina Carpenter has created for herself with songs like Good Graces, Bedchem, and Juno, while also having a really deep emotional core to it about another love triangle Sabrina finds herself caught in and how she's struggling to find real relationships that are working for her with songs like Sharpest Tool, Dumb and Poetic, and Slim Pickens. I also don't think an album has made me laugh this much. Some of my favorite moments are, of course, Come Ride on Me, I mean Camaraderie, the entire chorus of Taste, Since the Lord Forgot My Gay Awakening, and I'm So Fucking Horny. Like, it doesn't get better than this. And it's so tight-knit because even on the more emotional songs, there are still those funny, humorous moments. The only track that just leans all the way into the emotional sad side is Don't Smile, and I guess even Lie to Girls. But those are closing out the album, those are rounding out the story, so it makes sense. I think any complaints about this album center around the sound and how it kind of switches between genres. And of course, people are blaming Jack Antonoff once again, even though I think he did a great job. But I don't know, I felt like the sound and vibe of the album is actually pretty cohesive to me and it made sense. I love the mix of country with Sabrina's typical pop sound. It's really well done, and there's just this overall vibe of lightheartedness to the whole thing. Since it's pretty soon, this might change, but my top 3 as of right now are Juno, Slim Pickens, and Good Graces. But there's honestly so many incredible tracks here. I'm giving this a 9 out of 10, and it will definitely be a while before I get tired of this album.
I'm everywhere, I'm so Julia.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before. Sorry, I don't know what that had to do with anything. Anyways, Brat is a great album. If we were ranking purely off cultural impact, Brat would instantly be number 1. And if you live in the United States, I don't think I need to explain why. Honestly, all the good things about this album have already been said by so many other people. The sound is so fresh and unique, really taking Charli's club electric pop sound to its most realized potential. It seamlessly meshes the concepts of both being a 24/7 party girl and a celebrity with real insecurities about her place in the music industry and her relationships with other women. There are so many genuinely heartbreaking moments on this album. For example, I Don't Feel Like Nothing Special. Honestly, I'm always thinking about my weight, and literally the entirety of So I. And yet at the same time, this is such a fun album that has become the staple of the summer. How do you have a poppy electric banger like Sympathy is a Knife containing lyrics like Don't Know Why I Want to Buy a Gun? Really, the best albums of this year and in general to me are those where you can just tell and feel the ingenuity and effort that went into crafting them. You can tell they wrote a ton of songs, they tried so many different sounds until they found the exact right lyrics and sounds and songs and put them in the exact right order, and I think this album is definitely that. It's just so geniusly done. My only complaint is similar to what I talked about with the rise and fall of the Midwest Princess, actually, which I find to be very similar to Brat in a lot of ways. I talked about how there's a very intentional shift in the second half of that album to be more vulnerable, more about Chapel's worries with her moving to California and her sexuality, kind of like the fall of the Midwest Princess as a comment pointed out on that video. I feel like Brat does a similar thing where after Von Dutch and everything is romantic, the energy slightly shifts and the tracks overall slow down just a tiny bit. And while I totally acknowledge that shift is very intentional as Charli wants to get a little more serious in the second half, I just think I prefer the energy of the first half a tiny bit more, and I like how the first half is able to mix in those vulnerable introspective themes while not losing steam and losing momentum. I will also say all the best albums so far and going forward are no skip albums to me, but I don't exactly feel the same way about Brat. I'm not the biggest fan of I Think About It All the Time, and Mean Girls is sometimes a skip for me, but to me, that is all holding this back from being a 10 or even an 11 out of 10, because the highs of this album are just so damn good. So yeah, 9 out of 10, easily one of the most defining albums of 2024 and Charli's whole career. My top 3 are 365, Von Dutch, and funnily enough, Sympathy is a Knife. I really love how vulnerable this song is while still being a banger that I could jam to at a party, and I would say it's unfortunate to see how people have just reduced this song down to being about fan wars, but I also am not really surprised. I will always stand by how stupid fan wars are. I think at best they're weird and pointless, and at their worst, they are kind of dehumanizing. And yes, it would be really cool if Charli and Taylor one day worked it out on the remix, but ultimately what goes on between celebrities behind closed doors is not really any of our business, and not everyone has to be best friends, which is literally like a big theme of this album that Charli herself made a point of.
Only God knows. 16 carriages driving away while I...
We have reached the top 2, and these are the albums that I would consider to be 10 out of 10s. Now, don't cancel me, but I have not kept up with Beyoncé nearly as much as I should be. I mainly started out with Renaissance when so many of my friends were telling me I should listen to it, and it was everywhere, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll listen to it. And it took me a little bit of time to get used to, but once it grew on me, I loved it. It instantly became a classic. Somehow, Cowboy Carter turned out to be just as good, and in my opinion, it's even better. I mean, what do I even say about this album? You just have to listen to it to understand why it's so good. This album manages to be nearly flawless for its entire 1.5-hour runtime. 27 tracks, and not a single bad one. Yes, including the spoken word interludes. That alone is an incredible feat. But she tops that with such a beautiful story, seamlessly meshing the genres of country, pop, and hip-hop, while also addressing various nuanced themes like the racial history of country music in America, genre, family and upbringing, and so many more. From an analytical standpoint, I don't think I could do this album justice because there's so much packed into these tracks that I don't honestly even think I have the ability to unpack it. And of course we know from Renaissance that Beyoncé is really good at transitioning from one song to another, but I honestly am still blown away by how she made the entire stretch of songs from Yaya all the way to the end of the album all blend together so beautifully, while each song still feels very distinct and adds to the story at hand. It's just incredible. I could gush on and on about this album, but it's kind of hard to explain. I think you really just have to listen to it to understand. And if you don't get it, that's totally fine, but I will always consider this one of the best albums of 2024. My top 3 are 16 Carriages, Yaya, and Tyrant. And honestly, even though I will admit these and my other favorite tracks on this album aren't particular standouts to me in the context of everything released this year, the sheer consistency and just beauty of this album instantly made it a 10 out of 10.
And now we right. We can't be friends.
I think part of the impact of an album, not just for me, but for a lot of people, has to do with when that album came out. When you listen to new music, you automatically make connections to your own life, and those connections can really strengthen or weaken an album. And I think that especially happened to me with Eternal Sunshine. When this album came out, it really just resonated with me and struck a chord that has made it stand out and remain one of my favorite pieces of work ever, and my favorite album of 2024. This album is largely about Ariana trying to make sense of her relationship with Dalton and her engagement, the breakup, the ensuing drama she went through, all that. There's a question asked at the start of this album: how can I tell if I'm in the right relationship? And this entire album, every single track, is devoted to answering that question. She seems to come to a conclusion at the end of Ordinary Things with the voice memo from her grandmother, but then it loops right back to the start and you're caught in this cycle again. So through the album's runtime, as she's trying to answer this question, I think the album becomes much deeper than just being a breakup album. This is an album about self-discovery, about understanding how you form relationships with other people. And not only do I just think that concept is so gorgeous and told so beautifully through the songs in this album, but I also think that's why it really hit different for me. Again, the themes of self-discovery are just really layered throughout this album, and the more I listened, the more I resonated. My top 3 on this album are still the same as before in my ranking of every Ariana Grande song: We Can't Be Friends, Eternal Sunshine, and Bye. And like, this is easily a no-skip album, and there is not a single mid-track or any moment where the energy falters in this album. But I think these 3 songs in particular, the top 3 that I listed, are some of the best songs released this entire year, and some of the most personally impactful to me. I've said this before, but We Can't Be Friends is a song that I cannot listen to without crying. genuinely. Part of that is, you know, how I related the song to my own life when it came out, but part of that is also just the ingenuity of the song and the bravery and beauty of the message. This album really explores what it means to lose someone, what it means to grieve, which is then further explored on Eternal Sunshine, harkening back to the movie Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, which I literally watched because of this album. And then we have Bye, which I think might be my most played song of the whole year, and I mean, it's a bop, that's largely why, but I also think Bye represents the refined songwriting I'm trying to get at in regards to this album. She talked about this song being the most difficult for her to write because she wanted it to be sincere. And I just think it turned out so well.
Honestly, it's a very simple and silly lyric, but it was hard for the reason that I desperately didn't want it to sound like a fuck you. I wanted it to sound like, I need to leave, so bye.
That's what stuck out to me most when I first heard this song, and what still sticks out now. It's groovy and hooky, but it's also sincere and genuine, as with this entire album. And I've just been gushing about the songwriting and the construction and the concept of the album, but I haven't even addressed the sound, which is just so brilliant. This is Ariana's pop R&B style refined to perfection, with of course so many incredible vocals to back that up. I really do think this is her best album, as with a lot of albums this year being their artist's best, but especially here, this is just such a masterful project, and I'm so glad she was able to do this and come up with this. 10 out of 10. I still cannot get over Eternal Sunshine. So that's the full ranking. This recording is already 40 minutes long. Wow. I can never release short videos, can I? Anyways, this was actually a lot of fun to put together, and I really enjoyed making this video. So if you want me to talk further in depth about any of these albums, I would be more than happy to in their own dedicated videos. Again, please go fill out that unpopular opinions form if you want me to react to anything in a future video. I would love to hear your thoughts. And stay tuned for some more commentary next Friday, ideally. Okay, bye! And that's when you found me. Oh. Okay, anyways.